History, as we are taught to understand it, feels solid. Names, dates, victories, defeats. Empires rise, empires fall. Heroes are crowned, villains are condemned. Everything appears fixed, written in stone, immune to doubt. But history is not stone. It is paper, and paper can be edited, burned, rewritten, or quietly replaced. This story is not about forgotten people. Forgotten implies accident, neglect, the slow erosion of memory over time. This story is about people who were removed, erased, people whose fingerprints are all over the modern world, yet whose names are missing from the frame. People who changed the direction of history, then vanished from the official record as if they had never existed at all. Every civilization tells stories about itself. Those stories serve a purpose. They explain why certain families rule, why certain beliefs dominate, why certain wars were necessary, why certain deaths were inevitable. But behind every clean narrative lies a messier truth. Power rarely allows complexity. Power prefers simplicity. One hero instead of many. One face instead of a crowd. One version instead of the truth. Erasure is not random. It follows patterns. It has rules. It has beneficiaries. The first rule is this: history favors the survivors, not the innocent, not the brave, not the brilliant, the survivors. Those who remain in power long enough to tell the story. Those who control the archives, the schools, the monuments, and the laws. Those who decide which names are carved into stone and which are left to rot in silence. The second rule is that uncomfortable people do not survive on the page. Anyone who threatens a narrative becomes dangerous. Anyone who complicates a victory, questions a prophet, outshines a leader, or exposes hypocrisy, risks being removed not only from life, but from memory. And the third rule is the cruelest of all. Once erased, most people stay erased. Because correcting history requires effort, courage, and the willingness to admit that the story we inherited was incomplete or false. Most societies would rather protect a lie than reopen a wound. Erasure can happen loudly. A public execution, a show trial, a dramatic fall from grace. But more often it happens quietly. A missing chapter, a footnote reduced to a sentence, a name removed from later editions, a contribution credited to someone else. Silence is the most effective weapon history has ever known. Consider how often history is taught through individuals rather than systems. We are given kings, generals, prophets, presidents, singular figures standing at the center of massive events. This framing is not accidental. It creates the illusion that history moves because of exceptional individuals, rather than networks of influence, collaboration, conflict, and chance. And when only one face is allowed to represent an era, all other faces must disappear. Sometimes erasure is ideological. A thinker challenges religious authority and becomes a heretic. A scientist contradicts accepted doctrine and becomes insane. A reformer threatens social order and becomes a criminal. The label changes, but the result is the same: removal. Sometimes erasure is political. Revolutions, especially, are ruthless editors of the past. Yesterday's allies become today's traitors. The people who planned, funded, or enabled change are often too inconvenient once power has been secured. They know too much. They remind the new rulers that the victory was not inevitable, or pure, or theirs alone. Sometimes erasure is cultural. Certain groups are deemed unworthy of remembrance. Women, slaves, colonized peoples, religious minorities. Their labor builds civilizations, but their names rarely survive. Their stories are absorbed into the background, treated as anonymous forces rather than human lives. And sometimes erasure is personal. Jealousy, fear, insecurity. History is written by human beings, and human beings are flawed. A leader who cannot tolerate rivals will not tolerate memory of them either. What makes erasure especially effective is that it rarely looks like a crime. There is no blood on the page, no scream in the archive. Just absence, a gap where something should be. And unless you know what to look for, you never notice it at all. Ask yourself a simple question: how many people does it take to change the world? The answer is never one, yet history repeatedly insists that it is. One emperor, one general, one prophet, one genius. This insistence should make us suspicious. Real change is messy. It requires networks, supporters, dissenters, opponents, accidental heroes, and silent contributors. When only one name survives, something has gone missing. Education systems reinforce this narrowing. Textbooks must be short, stories must be simple, moral lessons must be clear. Complexity is sacrificed for memorability. And in that sacrifice, entire lives disappear. The students never know what was removed because they were never told it existed. Over time, repetition hardens these stories into truth. When something is told often enough, it becomes unquestionable. Challenging it feels like an attack, not on history, but on identity. Nations, religions, and movements anchor themselves to their founding myths. To question those myths is to question legitimacy itself. This is why erasure is so powerful. It does not merely remove people from the past, it shapes the future. It teaches us who matters and who does not. It tells us which voices are dangerous, which ideas are acceptable, which sacrifices are worth remembering. And perhaps most disturbingly, erasure teaches obedience. It teaches that those who step out of line will not only be punished, but forgotten. That even if you change the world may refuse to remember you. Throughout history, there have always been individuals who operated in the shadows of famous names. Advisors whose strategies won wars. Thinkers whose ideas fueled revolutions. Scientists whose discoveries were claimed by others. Leaders who were too honest, too radical, too early. Their influence is undeniable once uncovered, yet their absence from mainstream history is treated as normal. When historians later rediscover these figures, they are often framed as curiosities. Interesting side notes. Lesser-known contributors. But this language itself is part of the problem. It suggests that their obscurity is natural rather than engineered. Erasure is not always total. Sometimes it is partial. A name remains, but the story is distorted. Contributions are minimized, motivations are simplified, flaws are exaggerated. The person becomes a caricature, easier to dismiss, easier to forget. The irony is that erasure often fails in the long term. Traces remain: letters, journals, marginal notes, contradictory accounts, history leaks. And when enough leaks are examined together, a different picture begins to form, a picture that challenges the official version. But uncovering these stories requires effort. It requires skepticism toward authority. It requires reading between the lines and asking uncomfortable questions. Who benefits from this version of events? Who is missing? Why does this story feel too clean, too convenient? In this series, we will follow those missing threads. We will look at people who were indispensable to history, yet deliberately sidelined. People whose ideas frightened institutions. People whose existence complicated power. People whose memory had to be controlled. These are not conspiracy theories. They are documented lives, supported by evidence, ignored by summary. Their stories survive not because power protected them, but because truth has a stubborn habit of resurfacing. Understanding erasure changes how we see the past. It also changes how we see the present. Because the mechanisms have not disappeared. They have only evolved. Today, reputations are erased digitally. Contributions are buried algorithmically. Narratives are managed in real time. The question is no longer whether erasure happens. It is whether we are willing to notice it. History is not a neutral record. It is a battleground, and memory is the prize. The people you are about to meet did not lose that battle because they were insignificant. They lost because they were dangerous to the story someone else wanted told. And if history has erased them once, it can erase them again. Unless we remember to look. When people think about the Russian Revolution, one name dominates the story: Vladimir Lenin. His face, his speeches, his image preserved in statues, posters, textbooks, and slogans. The revolution appears personal, almost inevitable, as if history itself had chosen him as its instrument. But revolutions are never the work of one man. And in this case, the most dangerous mind behind the transformation of an empire was not Lenin at all. His name was Alexander Parvus. If that name means nothing to you, that is not an accident. Parvus did not simply fade from history, he was actively removed from it. His role was too central, too compromising, too revealing. To acknowledge him would have meant admitting that one of the most important political revolutions of the modern world was engineered not only by ideology, but by money, manipulation, and calculated chaos. Alexander Parvus was born Alexander Helphand in 1867 in what is now Belarus. He was brilliant, restless, and intensely ambitious. From a young age, he immersed himself in economics, philosophy, and revolutionary theory. Unlike many idealists of his era, Parvus was not satisfied with abstract ideas. He wanted results. He wanted power to move, systems to collapse, and empires to bleed. He understood something that many revolutionaries did not. Ideology alone does not topple regimes. Logistics do. Funding does. Timing does. And above all, exploiting weakness does. By the early 20th century, Parvus was deeply embedded in European socialist circles. He knew Marxist theory inside out, but he also understood international finance, trade networks, and geopolitical rivalries. He was fluent in the language of bankers and generals, as well as that of workers and intellectuals. This combination made him extremely dangerous. Parvus believed that Russia was ripe for collapse. Its political system was brittle, its economy strained, its population restless. But he also believed that internal unrest would not be enough. Russia needed external pressure, war, destabilization, a spark large enough to fracture the state completely. This is where Parvus crossed a line that many of his comrades never would. During the First World War, Parvus approached the German government with a proposal. Germany and Russia were enemies. Germany wanted Russia weakened or removed from the war. Parvus offered a solution: support revolutionary forces inside Russia, fund them, transport their leaders, accelerate internal collapse. A revolution would serve German interests and fulfill socialist goals at the same time. To the Germans, this was not ideology, it was strategy. And Parvus was offering them a weapon more effective than armies. The Germans agreed. What followed was one of the most consequential covert operations in modern history. Parvus became the intermediary between German intelligence and Russian revolutionaries. He helped organize financial support, propaganda networks, and logistical channels that allowed revolutionary activity to scale rapidly. And most famously, he helped arrange the transport of Vladimir Lenin from exile back into Russia in 1917. The image of Lenin returning in a sealed train has become legendary. What is rarely emphasized is who made that journey possible, who negotiated the deal, who convinced Germany that this obscure revolutionary was worth the risk, who ensured that resources were waiting on the other side. Parvus did. Lenin, for all his ideological commitment, was dependent on systems he did not control. He needed money, transportation, printing presses, and protection. Parvus understood how to provide all of it without appearing at the center of the stage. Why would Parvus stay in the shadows? Because he believed revolutions are more effective when their architects remain invisible. Leaders become symbols. Symbols can be controlled. The real power lies with those who shape conditions, not speeches. But Parvus made a fatal miscalculation. He assumed that once the revolution succeeded, his role would be acknowledged, or at least tolerated. He underestimated how threatening his existence would become to the new regime. After the Bolsheviks seized power, Lenin consolidated control quickly. The revolution needed legitimacy. It needed to appear organic, inevitable, and morally pure. Any suggestion that it had been facilitated by a foreign enemy threatened that narrative. Parvus was living proof of that threat. He knew too much. He had records, connections, and credibility. He represented the uncomfortable truth that the revolution had been helped, in part, by German interests seeking strategic advantage. For a government trying to define itself as the authentic voice of the Russian people, this was unacceptable. So Parvus was erased. He was excluded from the new political order. His contributions were minimized or denied. Soviet historians recast him as irrelevant, opportunistic, or even hostile. His name disappeared from official accounts. Where it appeared at all, it was framed negatively. Lenin never publicly credited him. In fact, Lenin distanced himself deliberately. The revolution, in its official form, could have no visible architects other than its chosen heroes. Parvus spent his final years isolated, wealthy but politically sidelined. He died in 1924, the same year as Lenin. When Lenin's death triggered global mourning and monumental remembrance, Parvus's passing barely registered. The silence was complete. Why does this matter? Because understanding Parvus changes how we understand the revolution itself. It reveals that ideology alone did not bring down the Russian Empire. Strategic funding, foreign interference, and calculated destabilization played decisive roles. It also reveals how revolutions sanitize their own origins. Once power is achieved, the methods used to obtain it become liabilities. Those who enabled the rise must be removed to preserve the myth. Parvus was not erased because he failed. He was erased because he succeeded too well. His story also exposes a broader pattern. History prefers clean revolutions led by noble figures. It is deeply uncomfortable with the reality that change often comes through morally ambiguous alliances and ruthless pragmatism. To acknowledge Parvus would mean admitting that the Bolshevik Revolution was not only a triumph of ideas, but also a product of manipulation. That truth threatens not only historical pride, but ideological purity. So instead, Parvus became a ghost. Today, his name survives mostly in academic footnotes and specialist studies. He is rarely mentioned in popular histories. His influence is treated as secondary, his role as exaggerated or controversial. But the evidence remains. Financial records, diplomatic correspondence, testimonies from contemporaries. The revolution did not move without him. Parvus understood something that history often hides. Power rarely belongs to those who speak the loudest. It belongs to those who control the conditions under which others speak. Alexander Parvus did not want monuments, he wanted results, and he got them. Some people are erased from history because they threaten power. Others disappear because they threaten comfort, because their ideas force society to admit that suffering was unnecessary, that deaths were preventable, that ignorance was a choice. Few stories illustrate this more brutally than that of Ignaz Semmelweis. If his name sounds unfamiliar, consider this. Semmelweis discovered one of the most important principles in modern medicine, a discovery that could have saved millions of lives decades earlier than it did. And for this, he was ridiculed, rejected, professionally destroyed, and ultimately driven to madness. Ignaz Semmelweis was born in 1818 in what is now Hungary. He studied medicine in Vienna, one of Europe's most advanced medical centers. In the mid-19th century, medicine was evolving rapidly, but it was still trapped by tradition, hierarchy, and arrogance. Doctors were authorities, their word was law, and questioning them was dangerous. Semmelweis was assigned to the maternity ward of the Vienna General Hospital. There he encountered a horrifying reality. Women were dying in massive numbers from childbed fever, an infection that struck shortly after childbirth. In some wards, mortality rates reached as high as 30%. Women begged not to be admitted, some gave birth in the streets rather than enter the hospital. The mystery baffled the medical establishment. Theories ranged from bad air to emotional shock. Doctors debated endlessly while women continued to die. Semmelweis did something radical. He observed. He noticed a disturbing pattern. The hospital had two maternity wards. One was staffed by doctors and medical students, the other by midwives. The ward run by doctors had a dramatically higher death rate. This made no sense until Semmelweis looked closer. Doctors routinely performed autopsies in the morning, dissecting corpses with bare hands. They then went directly to the maternity ward to examine women in labor. They did not wash their hands. At the time, the idea that doctors themselves could transmit disease was unthinkable. But Semmelweis saw the connection. The final piece fell into place when a colleague died after cutting his finger during an autopsy. His symptoms mirrored those of the women dying from childbed fever. Semmelweis realized that cadaverous particles were being transferred from corpses to living patients. The implication was devastating. Doctors were killing their patients. Semmelweis introduced a simple solution: hand-washing with chlorinated lime before examining patients. The results were immediate and undeniable. Mortality rates plummeted. In some months, deaths dropped to near zero. This should have made Semmelweis a hero. Instead, it made him an enemy. His findings challenged the authority of senior physicians. They implied guilt, not just ignorance. To accept Semmelweis's theory meant admitting that countless deaths had been caused by doctors themselves. The medical establishment was not ready for that truth. Rather than embrace the evidence, they attacked the man. Semmelweis was mocked. His ideas were dismissed as unscientific. He was accused of exaggeration, hysteria, and incompetence. Senior doctors refused to change their practices. Journals rejected his work. His position became precarious. The irony was cruel. Semmelweis lacked the language of germ theory, which had not yet been developed. He could demonstrate results, but he could not fully explain why they worked. And in a world obsessed with theory over evidence, this was fatal. Frustrated and increasingly isolated, Semmelweis became more confrontational. He publicly criticized colleagues, accusing them of murder. His tone hardened as women continued to die unnecessarily. This only accelerated his downfall. He was pushed out of Vienna. His career stagnated. His mental health deteriorated. The man who had saved countless lives was treated as a nuisance, then as a madman. In 1865, Semmelweis was committed to an asylum. There, in a final grotesque twist, he was beaten by guards and developed an infection. He died 2 weeks later. From sepsis, the very condition he had spent his life trying to prevent. After his death, history moved on without him. Germ theory was later developed by Pasteur and others. Hand-washing became standard practice. Mortality rates fell worldwide. Medicine congratulated itself on progress. Semmelweis was barely mentioned. When he was remembered at all, it was as a tragic figure, a cautionary tale about poor communication or difficult personality. His central truth, that institutional pride killed people, was softened, diluted, and deflected. Why was Semmelweis erased? Because his story was too uncomfortable. He proved that progress was delayed not by lack of intelligence, but by arrogance. That suffering persisted because admitting error was harder than letting people die. His life exposed the dark side of expertise. The refusal to listen when evidence threatens status. History prefers narratives of gradual enlightenment. The idea that doctors slowly learned, science slowly advanced, mistakes were understandable. Semmelweis disrupts that comfort. He shows that solutions existed, were proven, and were rejected. That is not a flattering story. So instead of centering him, history waited until his ideas could be absorbed without blame. Once hand-washing was normalized, the urgency vanished. The deaths became abstract, Semmelweis became optional. This pattern repeats again and again. Innovators who challenge systems too early are not celebrated. They are punished. Their ideas are accepted only after they are gone, when no one has to apologize. Semmelweis did not fit the hero mold. He was abrasive, emotional, desperate. But history rarely asks why. It ignores the context of constant resistance, the weight of preventable death, the isolation of being right in a room full of denial. His erasure also serves another function. It reassures institutions that dissenters can be dismissed, that even if they are right, time will eventually validate the system, not the individual. Today, Semmelweis is honored in retrospect. Hospitals bear his name, textbooks mention him briefly, but this recognition is sanitized. It strips away the hostility he faced, the lives lost while he was ignored, the cruelty of his end. Remembering Semmelweis honestly would force medicine and society to confront a disturbing truth. Progress is not inevitable. It depends on humility. And without it, people die. Ignaz Semmelweis was erased not because he failed, but because he succeeded before the world was ready. And in that delay, millions paid the price. History moved forward. He did not live long enough to see it catch up. There are generals remembered for their victories and generals remembered for their defeats. Khalid ibn al-Walid belongs to a rarer category, a general who never lost a battle, changed the course of history, and then disappeared from the center of the story by design. To understand why Khalid had to vanish, you must first understand how dangerous he was, not as an enemy, but as a hero. Khalid ibn al-Walid was born into the Quraysh tribe of Mecca, one of the most powerful clans in Arabia. From the beginning, he was trained for war. Strategy, horsemanship, discipline, and command were part of his identity. He did not learn leadership, he inherited it. In the early years of Islam, Khalid was not a Muslim. He was its most formidable opponent. At the Battle of Uhud, Khalid commanded the Meccan cavalry. When Muslim forces abandoned their positions, Khalid executed a devastating flanking maneuver that nearly destroyed the Muslim army. It was a tactical masterpiece, still studied today. Even his enemies recognized his brilliance. That moment should have secured his legacy as a villain. Instead, it marked the beginning of his transformation. Khalid eventually converted to Islam, not out of weakness, but out of recognition. He saw momentum, he saw inevitability. And when he joined the Muslim community, the balance of power shifted instantly. The Prophet Muhammad is reported to have given Khalid a title that would follow him forever: Saif Allah, the sword of God. It was not symbolic. From that point forward, Khalid became the unstoppable force behind the rapid expansion of the early Muslim state. He fought against tribes, empires, and professional armies. He defeated forces that outnumbered him. He adapted faster than his enemies could respond. Against the Byzantine Empire, one of the most sophisticated military machines in the world, Khalid executed maneuvers so unexpected that entire formations collapsed. At the Battle of Mu'tah, vastly outnumbered, he reorganized a retreat so effective that it appeared to be a victory. At Yarmouk, his tactics broke Byzantine resistance permanently in the region. He did not win through brute force alone. He understood psychology. He used speed, deception, and unpredictability. He attacked where enemies felt safest. He withdrew when victory seemed impossible, preserving his forces for the next strike. By any historical standard, Khalid ibn al-Walid was a military genius. And that was the problem. After the death of the Prophet Muhammad, the Muslim world entered a fragile phase. Authority needed to be centralized. Loyalty needed to be directed toward institutions, not individuals. The state was young, surrounded by enemies, and vulnerable to internal division. Khalid's reputation had grown enormous. Soldiers followed him with absolute confidence. Victories were attributed to him personally. His presence on the battlefield often decided outcomes before fighting even began. This kind of loyalty was dangerous. The second caliph, Umar ibn al-Khattab, understood something critical. If victories were seen as the result of one man, then faith in the system and in God would weaken. People might begin to believe that success came from Khalid, not from divine will or collective discipline. So Umar made a decision that shocked the army. He removed Khalid ibn al-Walid from command. There was no accusation of treason, no failure, no scandal. Khalid was dismissed at the height of his success. Another commander was appointed over him, and Khalid was ordered to serve without protest. Many expected rebellion. None came. Khalid accepted the decision immediately. He continued to fight as a subordinate, winning battles without recognition, obeying orders from men who knew he was their superior in warfare. This obedience preserved unity. It also erased him. From that moment on, Khalid's presence in historical narratives diminished. Victories were attributed to the army, to the caliphs, to the system. Khalid became a supporting figure in stories he once dominated. Why would a civilization sideline its greatest general? Because legends are unstable. A hero too large threatens authority. A warrior too successful risks becoming a rival symbol. Khalid's loyalty was unquestioned, but history does not rely on trust, it relies on precaution. Umar later explained his decision plainly. He feared that people would believe Khalid was invincible rather than understanding that victory came from God. The logic was theological, political, and psychological. Khalid was not punished. He was neutralized. He continued to live simply. He amassed no wealth. He sought no office. He fought when needed and withdrew when commanded. When he died, it was not on the battlefield, but in bed. This alone troubled him deeply. He is reported to have said that he had fought in dozens of battles, that his body bore countless scars, yet he would die like an old camel in the desert. There is bitterness in that statement, but also resignation. Khalid ibn al-Walid died without power, without command, without monuments. And yet, the world he helped shape endured. His erasure was subtle. He was not condemned or demonized. He was simply repositioned. His story was told, but never centered. His brilliance acknowledged, but never allowed to overshadow the structure of authority. This type of erasure is more sophisticated than silence. It allows memory but controls emphasis. Khalid exists in history, but not as the focal point he could have been. This served an important purpose. Early Islamic leadership needed to demonstrate that no individual was indispensable, that Islam was not built on heroes, but on principles. Khalid's removal reinforced that message more powerfully than any sermon. But it came at a cost. It obscured the reality that the early Muslim conquests were not inevitable. They were not effortless. They were achieved through extraordinary leadership, discipline, and strategic innovation. Khalid embodied that reality. By downplaying him, history simplified success into destiny. Khalid's story also challenges modern assumptions about ambition. He did not rebel. He did not seek revenge. He did not demand recognition. His submission preserved unity but ensured his own marginalization. That choice complicates the narrative. It denies us a clean arc of betrayal or tragedy. Instead, it presents a quieter form of erasure, one chosen by the system, accepted by the individual. Today, Khalid ibn al-Walid is remembered respectfully but cautiously. His title is repeated. His victories are listed. But his centrality is restrained. He is admired, not exalted. This restraint is intentional. It reminds us that history does not always erase through destruction. Sometimes it erases through discipline, through redistribution of credit, through silence where praise might have been. Khalid ibn al-Walid won wars that reshaped regions, weakened empires, and altered the trajectory of civilization. He did so without ever claiming power for himself. And because of that, he became something history struggles with. A hero who did not seek the throne. A general who obeyed his own removal. A man too powerful to remember fully. So history let him fade, not into obscurity, but into the margins. And in doing so, it preserved order, at the cost of truth. History is written by the victors, by those who survive the chaos, by those who benefit from the story told. But sometimes the most important truths are inconvenient. Too complex, too threatening, too dangerous to be included in textbooks or celebrated in classrooms. The truth is messy, and messy truths are often erased. The people who shaped the world, who toppled empires, who rewrote what was possible, many of them do not appear on the page. Or if they do, their contributions are diminished, their names footnotes, their achievements reframed as luck, accident, or secondary effort. The stories of Alexander Parvus, Toussaint Louverture, Ignaz Semmelweis, and Khalid ibn al-Walid are not anomalies. They are patterns. They are evidence that power, influence, and legacy are not always aligned. Sometimes the most decisive actors in history are removed not because they failed, but because they succeeded too well. Because their success threatens a narrative, a hierarchy, a worldview. Because remembering them might force society to confront uncomfortable realities, that revolutions are engineered, that freedom is fought for, that innovation is resisted, and that heroes sometimes step aside, or are pushed aside, for reasons beyond their control. Consider Parvus again. The Russian Revolution would not have unfolded as it did without his orchestration. He understood that movements are more than ideas. They are infrastructure, money, logistics, networks. Without him, Lenin might have remained in exile, the Bolsheviks might have faltered, and the 20th century could have looked entirely different. Yet history remembers Lenin. Parvus is almost invisible. Think of Toussaint Louverture, a slave who became the architect of the First Black Republic, who defeated colonial powers with discipline, strategy, and courage. Millions owed their freedom to him, yet he is relegated to a footnote outside Haiti, while European abolitionist narratives claim moral awakening as the cause. The uncomfortable truth is buried. Freedom was taken, not given, and history often prefers the illusion of charity to the reality of resistance. Semmelweis is a mirror of human arrogance. He discovered the most basic principle of hygiene, yet he was shunned, ridiculed, and left to die while millions continued to perish unnecessarily. Modern medicine benefits from his insight, but textbooks rarely acknowledge the tragedy that could have been avoided. His story exposes the fragility of institutions when confronted with inconvenient truth. And Khalid ibn al-Walid, the undefeated general, the strategist, whose skill could have made him a ruler if he wished. He reshaped the early Islamic world, won battle after battle, yet he was removed, silenced, and allowed to fade from prominence so that the narrative of collective divine will could prevail. His genius was too threatening to the system that needed stability more than personal glory. These examples reveal a pattern. History is selective, it is curated. It is as much about what is left out as what is included. The past, we are taught, is convenient, moral, and often incomplete. Those who could complicate the story are marginalized. Those who might challenge power are erased. Those who change the world in ways that disrupt comfort are silenced. Yet the truth persists. It survives in letters, diaries, correspondence, financial records, battle reports, and oral histories. It exists in subtle shadows, waiting for those willing to dig, to question, to notice the absence as much as the presence. Every time we ask, who is missing, or who enabled this event behind the scenes, we reclaim a small piece of reality. We confront history as it was, not as it was sanitized to be safe for consumption. This is why remembering the erased is so important. It is not nostalgia. It is not fetishizing forgotten figures for drama. It is acknowledging that the world we inherit is built on their actions. That progress is rarely linear. That moral narratives are convenient but incomplete. That power is rarely exercised in plain sight. And that often, the people most deserving of remembrance are the ones whom society chose to forget. By studying them, we gain perspective. We learn that revolutions are not inevitable, that freedom must be claimed, that innovation can be resisted, and that heroism sometimes means stepping aside for the greater order or being forced to. Their stories illuminate the forces that shape civilizations: human ambition, systemic fear, moral compromise, and the delicate balance between recognition and erasure. But it is not only about power or politics. These stories are lessons in courage, intelligence, and persistence. They remind us that influence does not require monuments, that change is possible even when unacknowledged, and that moral clarity does not always guarantee reward. Sometimes the most important work is invisible. Sometimes the world benefits without ever knowing the hand that guided it. And this brings us to a final truth. History belongs not to those who write it, but to those who question it. To those who see the silences, read between the lines, and ask why certain figures are celebrated while others are obscured. Every forgotten actor carries insight, every erased genius teaches humility, and every marginalized revolutionary invites reflection. So as you consider the stories we have explored, Parvus, Toussaint, Semmelweis, Khalid, and countless others who remain unnamed, remember this: the history you are taught is only a starting point. It is up to you to seek the shadows, to listen for the whispers, to recognize that the past is richer, stranger, and more human than the tidy versions we inherit. Because when you do, you discover the true complexity of our world, the fragility of narratives, the courage required to challenge them, and the extraordinary individuals whose lives shaped reality even when history tried to forget them. And now, dear viewer, if you found this journey through the hidden corners of history compelling, there is one small but powerful way you can help us continue. Subscribe to Beyond Time. Your subscription supports more storytelling, more uncovering of forgotten truths, and more journeys into the stories that history almost erased. Hit the bell, stay connected, and join us as we reveal the past the textbooks left out. Thank you for watching. Thank you for listening. Thank you for remembering those who history tried to forget. And as always, keep questioning, keep exploring, and never accept a story at face value. Beyond Time will guide you to the hidden layers, and together we'll uncover the truths that shaped the world, even if they were meant to remain forgotten.